Nguyen Van Vo. In the early morning hours of August 19, 2019, 57-year-old retired Cal State Fullerton Administrator Stephen Shek Kung Chan arrived on campus and parked in the College Park lot where he often left his car. As he sat inside the vehicle, he was ambushed and stabbed multiple times by Nguyen Van Vo, a 51-year-old former subordinate who had previously worked under him in the university's extension and international programs. Stephen Chan managed to exit the vehicle and collapse nearby, but he died shortly afterward from his injuries, despite emergency efforts by first responders. Investigators determined through physical evidence and surveillance that the attack had been planned in advance. Police recovered a backpack containing a knife, zip ties, a disguise kit, and other materials believed to be used in preparation for the stabbing. Detectives traced these items back to Vo and concluded that he had been lying in wait for Chan before carrying out the assault. As detectives examined Vo's work history and financial transactions, they uncovered that he had been embezzling more than $200,000 from Cal State Fullerton. According to prosecutors, the fraud had been carried out through fake tutoring and training invoices, and investigators concluded that Vo feared Chan was about to expose the scheme. This financial motive was later confirmed by the Orange County District Attorney's Office. He was arrested at his Huntington Beach home several days after the killing, and police recovered additional evidence linking him to the attack and to the embezzlement operation. Over the next 4 years, prosecutors built a case that included the financial records, campus surveillance footage, the items left at the scene, and other forensic evidence. In late September 2023, Vo pleaded guilty in Orange County Superior Court to first-degree murder and grand theft by embezzlement, and he admitted to the enhancements for lying in wait and use of a deadly weapon. The court immediately sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Brittany Norwood. After the Lululemon Athletica store on Bethesda Avenue closed on the night of March 11, 2011, Brittany Norwood asked her co-worker, 30-year-old Jana Troxel Murray, to return because she said she had forgotten her wallet. According to investigators and later court testimony, once the two women were back inside the store, Norwood attacked Murray with several different tools kept in the shop, including a wrench, a hammer, and a knife. The medical examiner, Dr. Carol Allen, testified that Murray suffered more than 300 separate wounds. Brittany Norwood, who grew up in Washington State in a large family, was known locally as a strong student athlete. According to reports from the Washington Post and NBC, she excelled at soccer in high school and later played at Stony Brook University in New York. Former teammates interviewed by multiple outlets stated that during her time as a student and athlete, there were repeated allegations of theft connected to her, although those incidents did not result in formal charges. After leaving college, Norwood worked a series of jobs before being hired at the Lululemon Athletica store in Bethesda, Maryland, as a sales associate in the months leading up to the murder. Co-workers later told investigators that merchandise had gone missing in the store before the killing and that Norwood had previously been suspected in similar situations, a pattern reflected in the accounts given by acquaintances from her past. She was described by colleagues as personable and energetic, traits that initially helped her fit in with the store's environment. However, concerns arose when Murray discovered that Norwood had been taking items without paying for them, and prosecutors later argued that this confrontation was the immediate trigger for the violence that followed. After the killing, Norwood tried to make the scene appear as if intruders had committed the crime. She placed zip ties on herself, made superficial cuts, and told responding officers that 2 masked men had entered the store, assaulted both women, and murdered Murray. But detectives quickly found inconsistencies in her account. According to testimony described in Washington Post and NBC reports, the store showed no forced entry, her injuries did not match her story, and blood-stained shoes in the store's back room matched shoe prints that had been deliberately walked through the crime scene. Brittany Norwood was arrested on March 18, 2011, after investigators determined that the evidence contradicted her description of a robbery, and on January 27, 2012, a Montgomery County jury convicted her of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling the brutality of the attack and the staged crime scene decisive factors. She is currently serving that sentence at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. Jennifer Neal Hoyle. Federal investigators found that Jennifer Neal Hoyle, a senior customer service representative and utility supervisor for the city of Cherryville, had been stealing cash utility payments over several years. According to the DOJ and local reporting, she took cash from customers, issued legitimate receipts, and initially credited their accounts, but later deleted the transactions and wrote off the balances, allowing the theft to go undetected for long periods. Authorities determined that the missing funds totaled approximately $92,922, representing cash payments that never reached the city's bank deposits. The investigation showed the conduct occurred between 2010 and 2013, during which the payment system logs and the city's financial records stopped matching. The discrepancies prompted a review that eventually uncovered Hoyle's pattern of reversing transactions and erasing account histories after collecting residents' money. The DOJ reported that she agreed to plead guilty after being confronted with evidence of the scheme. On March 20, 2014, in the Western District of North Carolina, Jennifer Neal Hoyle was sentenced to 12 months and 1 day in federal prison. The court also ordered 3 years of supervised release after her incarceration and required her to pay full restitution for the stolen funds. Nathaniel Chastain. He was a product manager at OpenSea, and his responsibilities included selecting which NFTs would be featured on the platform's homepage. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the information about which NFTs would be featured was confidential, and featured items typically increased in value after appearing on the home page. Federal prosecutors stated that Chastain used this confidential information to secretly purchase dozens of NFTs before they were publicly featured. The Department of Justice explained that he used anonymous cryptocurrency wallets and anonymous OpenSea accounts to carry out these purchases, and then sold the NFTs shortly after they appeared on the homepage for a profit. Investigators described this conduct as a form of insider trading involving digital assets. The criminal complaint filed in the Southern District of New York detailed that blockchain analysis revealed repeated patterns of purchases shortly before homepage placement, followed by rapid resale. According to the DOJ press release, Chastain's transactions were traced back to him through these anonymous wallets, which led to the federal investigation. OpenSea confirmed publicly that it conducted its own internal review and that Chastain was no longer with the company following the discovery of the activity. On June 1, 2022, federal agents arrested Chastain and charged him with wire fraud and money laundering. A federal jury in the Southern District of New York later found him guilty on both counts, and in an August 22, 2023 press release, the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed that Chastain was sentenced to 3 months in federal prison, followed by 3 months of home confinement and 3 years of supervised release. The court also ordered forfeiture of the proceeds obtained through the scheme and imposed a $50,000 fine. Abigail Hall. In a quiet medical facility in North Carolina, where patients trusted every person in scrubs to protect them, contract nurse Abigail Hall did something no one expected. She was secretly opening pre-filled morphine syringes, draining out the powerful pain medication and replacing it with plain saline. Patients suffering from severe pain, some recovering from surgery, others battling critical illness, were left with syringes that looked legitimate but delivered nothing at all. Their agony deepened for reasons no one could understand, and the truth would only emerge after patterns of unexplained pain crises raised alarm inside the facility. Abigail Hall had built a career that appeared stable and unremarkable. She worked as a contract registered nurse, the kind hired by medical centers to fill staffing gaps and maintain patient care during shortages. She was trusted to handle controlled substances, document their use correctly, and deliver accurate doses to vulnerable patients. Nothing in her background suggested she would ever undermine that trust, but over time, pharmacy logs began folding in on themselves. Vials that should have shown a precise sequence of use were missing. Morphine withdrawals increased while documented administrations did not. Nurses reported patients whose pain didn't respond to medication, patients who should have felt relief but instead rolled in pain or cried out with no explanation. The facility initiated an internal review, beginning quietly with pharmacy verification and chart audits, but the inconsistencies kept pointing back to the same person, Abigail Hall. When administrators confronted the mounting discrepancies, federal investigators were brought in. Surveillance, medication handling records, and chain of custody logs narrowed the timeline, ultimately revealing that Hall had been removing morphine from syringes and injecting saline back into them before returning them to supply areas. The act was not only a violation of medical ethics, it was a federal crime, one that placed patients at risk for untreated pain and, in some cases, serious medical complications. She was removed from duty, questioned, and eventually arrested. In federal court in the Western District of North Carolina, Abigail Hall stood before a judge as prosecutors detailed how she breached medical trust and endangered the very people she was hired to help. She was sentenced to 60 months in federal prison. After her release, she will remain under federal supervision, with restrictions preventing her from returning to patient care duties or holding positions involving controlled substances. Jerry Motley. In the middle of an ordinary workday at Reliable Fence in Clinton Township, Michigan, Jerry Motley, a longtime employee, walked into the shop with a gun hidden under his jacket. By the time the shots stopped echoing through the building, one co-worker was bleeding on the floor, and the company's owner, 57-year-old Thomas Badke, lay dead in his own office. What looked like another routine January morning at a small fencing business became one of Macomb County's most shocking workplace murders. Jerry Motley had worked at Reliable Fence for years, blending in as another blue-collar employee in a tight-knit company. Born and raised in Michigan, he lived much of his adult life on the edges, quiet, private, often keeping to himself. There are no public records of major accomplishments in his work history and no evidence of prior violent crimes, but co-workers would later describe him as a man who grew increasingly distant, often frustrated, and at times suspicious of others around him. On January 9, 2018, Jerry arrived at Reliable Fence armed with a handgun. He approached co-worker Angelo Micheli and, without warning, he pulled out the weapon and fired twice into Angelo's torso, leaving him fighting for his life on the shop floor. Instead of fleeing, Jerry continued through the building with steady, deliberate steps. He walked into the main office where the owner, Thomas Badke, was working at his desk, and standing only a short distance away, he raised the gun again and fired a fatal shot into Thomas Badke at close range. Jerry left the building but didn't get far. Police tracked him down within hours, arresting him without further gunfire. Detectives recovered the handgun and began assembling what prosecutors later called a clear picture of premeditated murder. A disgruntled employee who armed himself, confronted one co-worker, and executed his boss. Angelo ultimately survived his wounds, but the killing of Thomas Badke devastated the business and the family he left behind. Jerry went to trial, and a Macomb County jury convicted him of first-degree premeditated murder and multiple firearm offenses. That conviction was later overturned on appeal, forcing the county to retry the case. The second trial, held on June 24, 2025, reached the same conclusion that Jerry Motley intentionally planned and carried out the killing of his employer, and the jury again found him guilty on all major counts. He was sentenced in August 2025 to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he will never be released. Today, he is serving that life term in the Michigan Department of Corrections. Keith Lamont Blount. On that morning at the FedEx Cargo City complex near the Philadelphia International Airport, 57-year-old Keith Lamont Blount walked across the employee parking lot, raised a 9mm handgun, and unloaded 5 rounds into the Jeep where his co-worker sat, killing him in seconds. The victim was 54-year-old Bartholomew Masciulli, a veteran FedEx driver and training instructor who had evaluated Blount just days earlier. Masciulli had reportedly failed him on multiple road tests, ending Blount's hopes for becoming a driver, and, according to investigators, that ignited a grievance that had been simmering beneath the surface. Before that deadly confrontation, Blount had lived most of his adult life quietly. Born in 1965, he grew up in the Philadelphia area, drifting between jobs until securing steady employment at FedEx's sprawling Cargo City facility. He had no notable accolades at work and no public record of major accomplishments in his employment history, but what investigators later noted, however, was a long period of frustration. He had repeatedly attempted to move into FedEx's better-paying driver positions, but each attempt required clearing training and evaluation phases, tests Masciuli oversaw, and Blount failed them more than once. Prosecutors said this rejection weighed heavily on him, becoming a personal resentment that deepened over time. On October 7, 2022, that resentment erupted. Just after 7 a.m., while Bartholomew Masciuli sat inside his Jeep in the employee lot in Tinicum Township, Pennsylvania, preparing for another day of training sessions, security footage and witness accounts revealed Blount approaching the vehicle with determined steps. He lifted the handgun and fired 5 close-range shots directly through the driver's side window, killing Masciuli, who collapsed behind the wheel as Blount turned and walked away. But the violence did not stop there. Within hours, Philadelphia police located the SUV Blount was driving, and when officers moved in, Blount opened fire on them as well, striking a patrol vehicle and forcing police to return fire. He was wounded in the exchange, taken into custody and hospitalized under guard. Once stabilized, he was transferred to the Delaware County Jail to await prosecution for both the workplace killing and the police shooting. In December 2024, Keith Lamont Blount stood in a Delaware County courtroom and pleaded guilty to murder, aggravated assault on police, and multiple firearms offenses. Prosecutors laid out the full sequence of events, emphasizing the deliberate nature of the killing and Blount's willingness to shoot officers during his attempted escape. The judge imposed a sentence of 35 to 80 years in state prison, a term that ensures Blount, who is already in his early 60s, will almost certainly spend the rest of his life behind bars. Joël Fousset. Joël Fousset served in finance and human resources roles at Promise Community Homes, previously known as Rainbow Village, in St. Louis, Missouri. The nonprofit provides housing and support for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. In her position, Fousset had access to payroll systems, reimbursement processes, and organizational credit card accounts. According to federal prosecutors, Joël Fousset carried out a long-running embezzlement scheme for more than a decade. She caused unauthorized payroll deposits to be made to herself, issued reimbursement payments that had no legitimate business purpose, and used the organization's credit card for personal expenses. Investigators determined that the total amount she stole was $690,902. The nonprofit reported the losses, and the case was referred to federal authorities. After reviewing payroll records, financial documents, and bank transactions, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Missouri charged her with embezzlement, and she admitted the conduct outlined in the charging documents. On September 18, 2025, in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Missouri, Joël Fousset was sentenced to 40 months in federal prison. The court also ordered her to pay the complete $690,902 in restitution to Promise Community Homes. Richard Brendan Globensky. Richard Globensky wasn't the face of the Masters. He wasn't on the course, and he wasn't anywhere near the cheering crowds. Instead, he moved quietly through the back corridors of Augusta National Golf Club, one of the most guarded, tradition-obsessed institutions in American sports. And for years, while he worked unnoticed behind warehouse doors, prosecutors say he carried out one of the most astonishing theft operations in golf history. He stole millions of dollars worth of Masters merchandise and historic memorabilia, including official green jackets that were never supposed to leave the property, and sold them to online brokers who paid top dollar for anything bearing the Masters emblem. He worked as a warehouse assistant at Augusta National, having access to storage areas holding decades of Masters apparel, limited edition items, and archival tournament pieces. Co-workers later described him as unremarkable, someone who blended into the workflow of receiving shipments, logging inventory, and preparing items for tournament operations. That ordinary facade made the scheme hard to notice, stretching across many years, long enough that thousands of items disappeared without anyone noticing the slow bleed. Federal prosecutors later revealed that Globensky funneled stolen master's gear to online brokers who paid him substantial sums, often reselling the items to private collectors who had no idea they were buying stolen property. The depth of the theft stayed hidden until one transaction drew attention. A green jacket linked directly to Augusta National Property records surfaced in a sale. That discovery triggered a federal inquiry, and soon investigators were tracing shipments, payment routes, and years of missing merchandise. By the time Globensky was confronted, the scale was staggering. More than $3.4 million in stolen master's goods quietly moved out of the warehouse he was paid to protect. He was arrested, charged in federal court, and brought before the Northern District of Illinois because many of the illicit sales moved through brokers based there. He admitted what he had done, entering a guilty plea and cooperating with investigators. On March 19, 2025, he was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison and ordered to pay about $3.45 million in restitution. Gabriel DeWitt Wilson. On April 20, 2021, at approximately 11:19 a.m., Gabriel DeWitt Wilson entered the Stop and Shop supermarket located at 50 Cherry Valley Avenue in West Hempstead, New York. According to Nassau County officials, he went directly to the second-floor manager's offices, where he shot and killed 49-year-old store manager Raymond Wishrop and wounded 2 other employees. One victim was shot in the face and chest, while another was shot in the shoulder and back. The store had roughly 200 people inside at the time, and Wilson was not scheduled to work that day. Police and prosecutors stated that he had previously been reprimanded at the store for threatening and harassing co-workers. ABC7NY reported that Wilson had also suffered a previous gunshot wound to the head years earlier in Baltimore. After the shooting, he fled the scene on foot and was located and arrested a few hours later in Hempstead. The jury found Gabriel Wilson guilty of murder, attempted murder, first-degree assault, and criminal possession of a weapon. On June 8, 2023, Judge Helene Gugerty sentenced him to 50 years to life in prison for killing Wishrop and shooting the 2 surviving co-workers. If you enjoyed this and want to see more interesting videos, I'm going to be posting every day on this channel. I would really appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Thank you very much.